Karl Marx made two predictions. First, that there would be a dictatorship of the proletariat, and second, that the people would rise up and seize ownership of the means of production from the capitalist bourgeoisie. Now, although it did not happen in the manner that he suggested, both of these predictions have largely come true. My earlier video, The Managerial Elites, explains who is in charge of this state of affairs, but in this video I want to tease out some of its more troubling implications. If you recall, Samuel T. Francis, following James Burnham, had suggested that the 20th century saw a revolution of mass and scale that created a mass bureaucratic state, the mass corporation, and the mass media. This gives rise to managerial capitalism, in which the old capitalist entrepreneurs have largely been replaced by the passive mass investor, and in which corporations are run not in the interests of such owners, but rather by the managers. The small entrepreneurial firm is thus replaced by the mass corporation, which, in the final analysis, isn't really owned by anyone but the great mass of people. There is thus little to no distinction in the society of mass and scale between the mass government and the mass corporation, and the incentives of both are the same: to grow, as is the permanent goal of the managerial class. To help make this more concrete, let us take the example of McDonald's. This is owned by a great many shareholders. As you can see, some of the biggest ones are massive asset management firms such as the Vanguard Group and BlackRock, as well as some investment banks like Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. It is also owned by various index funds and the US government pension fund. Now, who are all these investors? You're probably thinking of Ted Turner or Bill Gates, and who knows, maybe they are among the investors. But a huge portion of the money will come from average people: firemen, policemen, teachers, and so on. Their pensions, their savings accounts, their ISAs, their mortgages, all of them will be represented somewhere in here. So in effect, the people own McDonald's. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, well, but what about those huge investors like BlackRock or JP Morgan, who own a big chunk of the company? But look, BlackRock have the same owners. Look at the names: the Vanguard Group, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and then the index funds and the pension funds and so on. So how about JP Morgan? Well, it's the same story. Look, the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, Northern Trust again and again, and then the index funds, the pension funds, and so on. So who are this Vanguard Group that you keep on seeing then, you might be thinking? Well, the Vanguard Group is wholly owned by its clients, which is to say that if they manage your asset, you are a part shareholder. And whose assets are they managing? Well, yet again, it's the pension funds and mortgages and savings accounts of aforementioned firemen, policemen, teachers, and so on. And so we see that McDonald's, BlackRock, JP Morgan, the Vanguard Group, and quote-unquote we the people are one and the same. The distinction between the so-called capitalist class and the proletariat has somewhat broken down, although the managerial class still hold the reins of power in each organization. And of course, the US government funds a giant welfare state, so many poor people who don't pay into the system at all still get to take out of the system. 76.4 million, or 44.4% of Americans, pay no income tax at all. What was it that Marx said? From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. But now consider that when the US government takes a loan, it will issue government bonds that are bought by the likes of BlackRock, the Vanguard Group, and JP Morgan, who then give the government an injection of liquidity, also known as money, in exchange for the eventual yield on the bond, which the US government will pay these corporations down the line. But also consider that if BlackRock, the Vanguard Group, or JP Morgan ever, let's say in a huge financial crisis, looked like going out of business, the US government would also step in to bail them out. And so one can see, hopefully, that there is truly no distinction between the US government and any of these firms. In fact, the managerial elites can jump freely from one to the other. In the figure of a man like Michael Bloomberg, it's just made more visible and explicit. And naturally, the mass media is more of the same. Let's take CNN, for example. CNN are wholly owned by Warner Media, who are owned by AT&T. Who owns AT&T? Oh look, it's the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, Northern Trust, Morgan Stanley, etc., etc. And then index funds, pension funds, and so on. So much like McDonald's and every other publicly traded corporation, they are owned more or less by everyone, and of course controlled by the managerial elites. And so it should be clear that the government, the corporations, and the media are all wings of the same dictatorship of the proletariat, wholly owned by quote-unquote we the people, but wholly operated by the managerial class. And who are they? Well, like so many revolutionary commissars repeating their slogans over and over. We believe in democracy and equality. We believe in democracy and equality. Diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. Debt is money we owe ourselves. Debt is money we owe ourselves. And if Karl Marx could see all this, he'd be laughing his sick ass off. Now get out.